Thank you, my friend in the audience. Welcome to the Billy Wilder Theater. I'm Claudia Bester, the Director of Programs here at the Hammer Museum, and I want to welcome you all to tonight's Hammer Forum on why is it so hard to build housing in LA. The Hammer Forum is a series of public discussions about current social and political issues, and it's made possible with generous support from the Rosenblum family. Tonight is the fifth of a series on the housing crisis in LA, and in my opinion, it's one of the most urgent issues facing the city of Los Angeles right now. If you live here in LA, you know that for the past several years, we've been seeing a huge amount of unhoused people living on the street or in tents all over LA, in neighborhoods, on the sides of freeways, under bridges, in parks, on the beach, and really everywhere. I think the majority of Angelenos feel very concerned for the health and safety of all of these unhoused people, and lots of people are also very frustrated that there doesn't seem to be viable solutions to housing them, or at least not quickly enough to satisfy anyone. It can feel very overwhelming and unfixable, and also confusing. Why is it so hard to build housing for them? How did this problem blow up so exponentially? What happened to all the money that we voted to tax ourselves to help alleviate the crisis? What should we be demanding from our government, and what can we be doing as individuals? Part of why it's so confusing is that the housing crisis is not one thing, and it's not one group of people. There's many roads to homelessness, and prevention would probably need to take many forms. For example, children in foster care often age out of the care system and into homelessness. People returning from incarceration often have a hard time getting housing. People with children fleeing domestic violence need housing, and working people need housing, and the rents are too damn high, and the salaries are too damn low. Luckily, we have a good guide through this morass in the person of Anna Scott. Anna is a veteran journalist who's focused on housing and homelessness for over 10 years. She's a reporter for public radio station KCRW, and she also reports regularly on homelessness for NPR's national programs. She created and hosted KCRW's podcasts City of Tents, Veterans Row, and Samaritans. Before that, she produced the news programs Press Play, To the Point, and Which Way LA, and wrote for Bloomsburg Businessweek, the LA Times, and other local publications. We decided to break the giant topic of the housing crisis into smaller, more manageable subsections. And tonight we're going to try and drill down on just why it's so hard to build anything in LA. Anna Scott will be our moderator, and she's joined this evening by Hamid Behdad, Michael Lenz, and Yasmin Tong, all of whom have spent their careers working on building and urban planning issues. Hamid Behdad is the founder of the Central City Development Group, or CCDG, which is currently the developer of a 386-unit mixed-use development in downtown LA, and which manages and provides advisory services for several mixed-use development projects totaling 775 residential units. Hamid has served 3 LA mayoral administrations where he earned the title Czar of Adaptive Reuse Projects. Since 1999, he's worked on redeveloping historic buildings and championing efforts to develop over 12,000 housing units through adaptive reuse, with an estimated economic value to the city in excess of $6 billion. Michael C. Lenz is an associate professor of urban planning and public policy and the associate faculty director of the Lewis Center for Regional Policy Studies at the UCLA Luskin School of Public Affairs. He conducts research on housing, neighborhood effects, and segregation by income and race. Professor Lenz has a PhD in public administration from NYU and a master's of public policy from the University of Michigan. Yasmin Tong is the founder of CTY Housing. She's been an innovator in the affordable housing field for more than 30 years. Her work in finance and development has resulted in more than $1 billion of affordable housing development nationwide. In addition to her work in affordable housing finance and development, she's also been an advocate for policy reform, including policies on equitable development in the city of Los Angeles and policies on development in unincorporated LA coastal areas. Prior to founding CTY Housing, she was a vice president at Bank of America's Community Development Bank and a senior account executive at Fannie Mae's multifamily division. Early in her career, she developed some of the first permanent supportive housing in Los Angeles and secured financing for the city's first resident purchase of a deteriorated building. So tonight we're going to hear from all of these people with hands-on experience dealing with City Hall, NIMBYs, developers, historic landmarks, environmental impact assessments, building codes, and all of the other factors that can affect building new housing in LA. They'll have a roundtable discussion and then take audience questions, and then I invite you all to join us for some coffee, tea, and cookies afterwards out in the lobby, and we can talk about it some more. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming our speakers, Anna Scott, Hamid Behdad, Michael Lenz, and Yasmin Tong.
Hello. Thank you all for coming. I'm Anna. I have my panelists here, Michael, Yasmin, Hamid. So we're looking at the question of why it's hard to build in LA, but first I want to set the stage for the conversation a little bit because the reason that we're talking about this at all is that part of what is at the heart of our affordability crisis here in Los Angeles is a shortage, a lack of housing supply, and we all know that prices are really not only contributing to our homelessness crisis, but putting a strain on just about everybody. I think the typical home in LA sells for maybe $1 million now, and rents are incredibly expensive. So I wanted to start with Michael. Can you just explain a little? I don't think a lot of people know sort of how well quantified our housing shortage actually is. That there is a system for projecting, what we're going to need, and there's supposed to be a system around meeting demand that hasn't quite worked for a long time. So could you explain that a little? Like, how do we know that we lack supply compared to demand here in LA?
Yeah, I think there are a few indicators. We can look at the cost of rent. We can look at the rent burden, which is the share of one's income that goes to rent. And in Los Angeles, it is we devote a considerably higher share of our income to rent. There's many more people as a share of the population in Los Angeles and in Southern California more broadly that spends in excess of 50% of their income towards rent, which, we know is a pretty key indicator that people have, not enough to spend on a lot of other necessities. So we can look at rents, we can look at housing prices, we can look at how that's changed over time. And, these indicators of just the sheer price or cost of living in Los Angeles and Southern California has always been high. It's always been a nice place to live and a very productive place to live. So we have, we've always had a high cost of living here. But that high cost of living has accelerated faster in the Southern California region over the last 20, 30 years than it has elsewhere. We also can look at the extent to which we've been building or not building as much as we used to. And so in California more broadly, we have built many fewer units, kind of on an annual basis than we used to. One way to think about it is since the Great Recession, which the lead up, of course, we built at a fairly robust level, but ever since the Great Recession, we have been pretty much building like it's been a recession still, and only in the last couple of years, really in California and in Southern California in particular, have we kind of caught up to what looks like, or started to catch up to what looks like, kind of a robust, good income or good economy sort of pace of building. And then, people that kind of, look at demographic growth or population growth, kind of population and household formation and, income growth are kind of, three very important factors that we look at to kind of project how much do we need to build. The estimates certainly vary, but, Southern California as a region, which has, roughly 18 million people, we need to build something like 1.2-ish million units over until through like 2028. So as far as like good demography, looking at projecting what our housing needs are, that's kind of the number, or give or take a few 100,000 units. And we've never built it anything like that kind of pace. So, from now until, the end of, this decade, roughly, thinking about how we're going to get to 1.2 million units between here and there is a very daunting challenge. So, again, you can look at kind of how much we're spending. You can look at projected growth. And all those are pretty clear warning signs that we need to build, at a fairly robust rate and, arguably the fastest rate we've built in a very long time. So,
well, I'm sure we'll figure out tonight how we can get those 1.2 million units built over the next 5 years or so. No problem. Well, Hamid, can you give us some perspective as a developer, someone that's done many, many, many projects, has worked at City Hall. Can you give us some perspective from the field? Actually, you told me when we were preparing for this panel that you told me about one project you've worked on that has been in the works since like 2016 or thereabouts. So using that as an example, can you I know that's an extreme example, but can you tell us a little about that and just to give people an idea of why sometimes things can take so long and be so difficult to get done?
Well, how much time do we have?
I guess the abridged version.
The short answer is that I have to admit that respectfully, City of Los Angeles is dysfunctional. And I know I get in trouble by my colleague hearing that, but I add a sentence to that. Probably some of the audience know it. There's a gentleman very well known in the urban community and civic work in Southern California, Rick Cole, who has been all over the Southern California as the councilman, mayor, as a policy maker, and so on and so forth. One time when he was working for Mayor Eric Garcetti as the innovation czar, he made a very famous statement which got him in trouble. He said, City of LA is set to fail. And I don't know if I want to go that extreme, but there are so many of these obstacles in City of LA that causes this dilemma. And I like to go over some of them if we have time. City of Los Angeles has the most comprehensive zoning code in the United States, which has been basically going back to 1940s and 50s and 60s, primarily 50s and 40s.
I'm going to remind you to move the mic with your head.
Oh, I'm
please.
sorry.
No problem.
And then this book, even compared to when I came to the United States 43 years ago, used to be this thick, now it is this thick. Now, why is that? Because every time there is a lawsuit, a layer is added to it. So as a developer, and I'm talking about market rate projects, and prior to the recent emergency measures by Mayor Bass, is that a developer assumes that if I know a consultant, read this book, read the manual which interprets this, then I know all I need to know about the development. Well, wrong. Because City of Los Angeles zoning regulations is not only this book and this manual interpreting the book. We have 45 community plans in City of Los Angeles. We have over 50 specific plans, such as Westwood, the specific plan in City of Los Angeles. Then we used to have Community Redevelopment Agency, which has rules and regulations for urban planning and land use. Of course, Community Redevelopment Agency went down, but the plans are still effective. In addition to all of that, we have perhaps over 1,000 different policies and regulations. Now, in order to comply with all of these in each specific district, either you are in Harbor or in Westwood or Bel Air, one has to comply with all of these and do not contradict. Now, to add to the dilemma, State of California recently, from what I have been reading, in the last 7 to 6 years has passed 106 assembly bills and Senate bills. These assembly bills and Senate bills are primarily related to the housing and affordable housing and issues such as parking and so on and so forth, but they're all development issues. Now, those all supersede these local rules and regulations. So you can imagine what kind of a hodgepodge this whole thing is. I came to United States on October 7th, 1985. And I got hired by City of LA when Mayor Bradley was in office as an engineer. The first or second month or 6 months there, they told me that we want to change the zoning code and improve it. Well, guess what? It's 2023, and I am 67 years old, and that has not happened. And what is the problem with that? The problem is that the zoning code of City of LA was basically written after World War II, which Mr. Kaufman and Broad and so on and so forth started developing the suburban lifestyle. Everybody go to San Fernando Valley, get a single family home, backyard barbecue, 2 SUVs on the driveway, and the zoning regulation was primarily set based on that single family home. Well, in 2023, that doesn't work. And I end my comments with this. In the most recent project that I have developed, Pearl on Broadway, 450 units of condominium, 35-story building, I had to comply with 17 of these plans and ordinances and make sure that I do not violate any of them. And that just gives you an example what we are facing. Now, of course, affordable housing,
Well-
she will be the expert to explain what we need to do.
Yes, affordable housing, is a whole other world, but I wanted to make it part of this conversation because, again, the reason we're having it is because this housing supply problem is at the heart of our affordability problem. It's, at the very root of our homelessness crisis. And so I do want to talk about affordable housing. I think it's also something that's not super well understood. I guess, first of all, can you just talk about the kind of affordable housing that you work on? What are we talking? Because affordable housing can mean many things. So what are we talking about?
Basically, affordable housing means that the household pays no more than 30% of their income on rent. What today, and when I started working in affordable housing in 1990 here in Los Angeles, most of the housing was intended for large families, and so it had to be designed a certain way, and you didn't need operating subsidy for it. Now, because the homeless situation is what it is, the funding sources prioritize that you have at least a certain amount of permanent supportive housing. So that's affordable housing with services for people who have special needs, persons who are who've experienced homelessness, survivors of domestic violence, persons with AIDS and HIV. There's a whole list of categories that make you eligible for permanent supportive housing, and so those apartments are very, very low income, and they have an operating subsidy. And so if someone's income is only $100 a month, then they pay $30 a month for their rent, and the operating subsidy pays the difference between the $30 that household can pay and what's considered, market rent. I'll put that in quotes. So that's what we develop now. It used to be affordable housing, and now a lot of it is permanent supportive housing.
Mm-hmm. And you have your own Byzantine process that you have to go through for any given project. Hamid was just talking about just the zoning issues that he has to deal with, and going through City Hall, how complicated that can be. Can you talk a little about what this process looks like in the affordable housing world?
Sure.
And my understanding is that it's not just dealing with those things, but it's the putting all the money together and financially engineering these projects that.
Right. Well, I think there are a couple more things that I would add to Hamid's description. So one thing has to do with so yes, Hamid was talking about entitlements, and a lot, and thank goodness the California legislature did pass those 106 bills, because it's really made it a lot easier for us to produce affordable housing. But at the same time, you have to deal with the neighbors, and there's a lot of friction there, and there's a lot of risk for the developer. The other part is organizing financing. And so a for-profit developer, and Hamid, you might disagree, but a for-profit developer would typically need two sources of financing. They have equity, and then they have a loan. And so maybe 20% equity and 80% loan. As an affordable housing developer, I probably have 5% loan that needs to be repaid, 5 to 20% loan, and then 80% is subsidy. But I can't just get one subsidy. I have to get multiple subsidies. I might have to get 5 is pretty typical. I've seen projects with as many as 10 subsidies. And it takes a really long time to organize that many sources of funding. You have to compete sometimes with everyone in the state of California, or everyone in the LA County, or everyone in the city of LA. And so the longer it takes to organize that subsidy, the more expensive your project gets because of inflation. And then you need more subsidy to pay, to cover the inflation. So it's a little bit of a, chasing your tail, trying to coordinate all the financing that you need.
Michael, why is LA like this? Why do we have all these? Why do we have all these community plans and complicated zoning codes? And how unusual is LA in this regard, in terms of making it hard to build?
Well, Hamid made the claim that LA zoning code is the most complex in the country, and I haven't fact checked that, but I don't have any reason to doubt it. Why I think why things are particularly complex here. You brought up Rick Cole, right? And I've also, learned from Rick some of the history of like the governance structure that we have in Los Angeles. And so, the shortest bit I could say on it is that some of the founding probably fathers of Los Angeles looked at New York and Chicago, and there were a few things they didn't want to replicate. One is the density and this setting the stage for what Hamid talked about, where the Broad Kaufman group could kind of go out in the San Fernando Valley and give everybody a backyard and a barbecue. So this kind of preference for a more pastoral life, or a less kind of congested, dense life. And you can all, maybe have a chuckle later at how we are a not congested city. So like, I think we have that is one way we were trying to not be New York and Chicago. The other way is, if you think about late, 19th century, early 20th century New York and Chicago, those were very corrupt governance schemes, and very corrupt political machines that extracted a lot of a lot of the blood and sweat of their electorate, went into the pockets of the elected officials there. Patronage, kind of boss machine sort of ways of running the city dominated city politics in those places. And one thing that we tried to do here in Los Angeles, and I think we did successfully, was to really spread the power and make sure that no one person in the form of a mayor, no, one body had too much power. And that also, I think, later on becomes not just like a diffuse governance scheme around the city of Los Angeles, but also we haven't even talked about the fact that don't have to travel very far to go outside of Los Angeles and have an entirely different planning and zoning set of rules that you have to follow because you're in an entirely different jurisdiction. We have 88 cities in LA County. But just within Los Angeles, we intentionally set up governance so that, I don't think people saw, 45 community plans or something like that. I don't think they saw that coming, but they wanted to have, power really spread in many different hands so that no one organization or kind of, part of the elected official body could really govern everything. And then, the last thing, I'll say about Los Angeles is, it's like a lot of other cities in the United States, both in its urban form and in its, really challenging land use and zoning schemes, but it's just way bigger and the problems become like a lot more complex because we're a city of 4 million people that, again, we also try to promise everybody a backyard and a barbecue.
Well, I think all of you mentioned these state bills, state laws that have come down in recent years, and I did want to talk about that. And maybe for the two people in the development world on the panel, I'm curious to hear more about how, if at all, these measures have affected your work for the better or for the worse. Because, and correct me if I'm wrong, there have been a flurry of bills just in the last few years from state legislators that are aimed at addressing this housing shortage that kind of supersede local control over a lot of these zoning issues in different ways and essentially say to local municipalities, okay, if you're not going to address this shortage problem, then we're going to exercise our power and come in and sort of do it in, more or less. I'm sort of summarizing this group of bills, but so yeah, I'm curious, have those impacted what you guys do? Do you see any good, bad change there happening in how you work?
I think it's made a huge difference for affordable housing developers. One thing is that with a lot of these bills have eliminated the need for paying for parking. In some of the early developments that I worked on in Los Angeles, we were like, oh, okay, well, we're going to have to do underground parking. And that was, $30,000 a space. And now it's $50,000 a space. So not having to pay for parking is, helps make the development less expensive and helps us spread those subsidy dollars around more apartments. The other thing is the amount of time that the locality has to process your entitlements application. That's also been kind of amazing. I've been in situations where the locality would take a year to do something because they weren't that affordable housing friendly, and they would just slow walk it until you threatened litigation, and then they'd say, oh, okay, we'll fix it. But now, depending on the project, it can be 90 days, and the jurisdiction has to review and take action on your application. So that's a huge savings as well, in terms of the amount of time it takes to get to an approved development. And so those, I think it is a huge change, and I think it's also making fewer projects discretionary, meaning that the neighbors or anybody can just say, no, I don't want this, and then the jurisdiction doesn't have to approve your project. So now we have a lot more by right projects, and so that's been a huge, benefit to the overall cause. And I'm trying to think if there's something else that I want to say about this. I do want to give the Bass administration some props because they did make an executive order early on in the administration to change the amount of time that that entitlements needed to be reviewed and approved. So I think the average is now about 45 days. So, and that part of the process used to take 6 months. I mean, I have some colleagues who spent 10 years on a development because of litigation around California Environmental Quality Act. So that kind of thing is off the table now. So, okay, I'm going to stop.
Well, thank you. Well, I 100% agree with the benefits that these assembly bills and Senate bills have brought to the affordable housing development community. And for that, I am extremely happy because I also do affordable housing consulting. Recently, I just obtained the approval for an 18 unit, small one in South LA, and that was a record. I got it entitled in less than a month. And that was because of the emergency directive by Mayor Bass. But as far as market rate is concerned, the convenience to affordable housing is also a little bit at the expense of the market rate. And the fact of the matter is that every time we pick up the phone and say, what happened to my project? They say, well, we're too busy working on affordable housing, which is, that's a priority. I'm not going to debate that. But for these assembly bills and Senate bills, honestly have not brought much for big development like what I am involved in. Meaning that parking, for example, just to be specific, it is a big deal for affordable housings, and I'm glad they did. However, in the market rate development, my demand for parking is because I have to provide it to have a buyer or a renter. A person who buys my condominium for $1.6 million not going to buy a condo in downtown LA if I don't have parking. So that kind of a advantages doesn't work for us, for market rate people. Primarily these things, these assembly bills and Senate bills, not only are for providing affordable housing and facilitating it, it's a little bit has political thing with it, and that is to help unions to be more involved in the market rate projects. And that obviously doesn't help the market rate projects. So we're not disappointed by these assembly bills and by Senate bills, but we're not as excited as affordable housing community either.
Well, do you see, as the person who was this pioneer of adaptive reuse, which was something huge in downtown Los Angeles, turning all of what had been empty old commercial buildings into residential properties. Do you see any opportunities like that? I mean, we're talking about housing supply, but, any opportunities now for innovative ways to increase our supply in LA without necessarily building tons and tons of new buildings? I mean, I don't know if it's ADUs or, anything like that.
I'm glad you brought that up. Just as a background, 30 seconds, I've been credited a lot, but it was a teamwork adaptive reuse program in the city of Los Angeles, starting from 1996, that created 15,000 units of housing until I left the city in January 1st, 2007. That is basically to get these historic buildings in downtown LA, convert them from office to residential. That's what's called adaptive reuse. The adaptive reuse was an extremely shining star in the history of city of LA. When I say we, I was not the only one, created 15,000 units of housing without a single penny subsidy from the government. That has never really happened I don't believe, in the history of United States of America. Now, those historic buildings in downtown LA, they're primarily the good ones. The low-hanging fruits are gone because I was involved in about 100 projects during the Reardon, Hahn, and Villaraigosa. But now, after COVID, there is a new wave of what we call it Class A office buildings. Just a report came this morning that the occupancy of office building in the United States of America has come to 50% of pre-COVID, and that is stabilized. Just to tell you how much of a vacant office space we have, not anymore in the old historic building, rather than in Class A buildings. Obviously, as a nation, we're not going to go ahead and tear down the library tower in downtown LA. We've got to make use of it. And these are, hopefully, will start with the big capital coming in, primarily corporations, because the mom and pop cannot attempt to do these projects. They're extremely complicated, they're extremely expensive. The building's going to be there, and they will be converted at some point. We're hoping soon than later. But to say that tomorrow morning we're going to have another 15,000 units out of Class A office buildings, that is not the case. But hopefully before I retire, maybe we start.
Interesting. Well, Michael, I want to ask you, how do you reconcile, I guess, the idea of preservation and preserving affordable housing that exists? And I don't just mean, subsidized affordable housing. I'm thinking now of like the tenant who has a rent-controlled unit that they've been in for 15 years and can't afford to lose. Like preserving that kind of housing and also dealing with the supply problem, because sometimes it does feel like they are in tension or conflict, right? Like we have the supply issue. It's not enough to keep up with demand, but at the same time, if somebody, often when people see the high rise go up in their neighborhood, or real estate speculators coming in, they start to feel anxiety that this isn't, as far as I'm concerned, right, this isn't going to help my housing problem. It's going to make my costs go up, and that kind of insecurity. So how do you reconcile those, two things that are true at the same time?
Yeah, I think, a couple of things. If we only allow density in a very small number of places, then it's going to put the squeeze in very specific places, right? Like, so if you either upzone a large land area, if you upzone a lot of our single family zoned areas, then like the likelihood that you're going to see large development on your block is very low, because there's a lot of different options that developers will now have, and they will not necessarily build like the biggest possible thing on the corner. There might be a lot of smaller housing developments that go up in a bigger variety of places. The other thing, if we're thinking about an individual that lives in something we might call naturally occurring affordable housing, which is, kind of scarce these days in Los Angeles, but is essentially either it's a very old, it's an old apartment building or an old unit in a less desirable neighborhood, and the rent is not particularly high. If there is new demand in that neighborhood, the demander of housing in that neighborhood is going to go somewhere. And so if you don't build anything in that neighborhood, they're going to come possibly for that, relatively cheap apartment unit that somebody's occupying. It might even, get somebody trying to figure out how to get rent controlled people out of their units so that they can, find a new renter that's willing to, pay the new market rent. So not building housing is often like a recipe for actually making it a lot harder on the individuals that are in that neighborhood, even if that new housing is not something that those individuals that already live there are going to live in. And then I guess the last thing I would say is, very few people, or a low share of renters, occupy single family homes. There are a lot of single family rentals in Los Angeles compared to a lot of other places. But if you're worried about renters, kind of looking at the potential for single family zone neighborhoods to house more people is not usually something that's going to negatively impact renters. It's often going to positively impact the earning potential of somebody who wants to sell their home in a single family neighborhood. That's obviously not usually the way that single family homeowners look at those options as far as additional density in their neighborhoods. But I'm a homeowner, and if I can do more, if the person who buys, my land can do more with it, that is a potential earning opportunity for me.
I want to ask you all about solutions before we turn it over to audience questions, but I have one more question for Yasmin in particular. I just wanted to touch briefly on some of the efforts, the local and state efforts to create more affordable housing, like Prop Triple H and Home Key. I think there's something of a perception, that what happened with these things, because we still have this horrible homelessness crisis. Are they doing anything? And so are they, tell us a little about those programs.
My opinion is yes, they are doing things. I'm actually on the Triple H oversight committee. So for folks who don't know, the city of Los Angeles had the authority to issue $1 billion of bonds to spend on permanent supportive housing to address the homelessness issue here. I am not remembering the exact number, but I think it was 7. I think what had been promised was something like 10,000 units, and then I think the actual number is, I don't know.
It was 10,000 units in 10 years, but that included the 3,000 units that the city would have produced without the measure. Okay. So it was like 7,000 attributable to the measure.
Okay, all right. So I think the measure actually came out at around 6,000 or 7,000. I am not exactly sure what the number is. So I think it actually did, achieve the deliverables. But I think, it doesn't happen overnight. I mean, as we've been talking, you can see that, developing housing is a very lengthy process. And I think that I think if a project is moving quickly, I would say it can be completed in 4 to 5 years. And I don't remember when Triple H began. So
I think it was passed in late 2016.
Okay,
Yeah.
So we're here now 7 years later, and a lot. I mean, I think like this is the year when a lot of these projects are opening up, ready for occupancy. So we're a little bit behind, probably due to limited subsidies and having to wait another year to get some more money to pay for the project, that type of thing. So I think the city delivered, and the affordable housing affordable housing developers that received those Triple H funds have delivered. Project Home Key, that has been sort of a 3-phase process since COVID. The idea was federal funds were awarded to the state. The state made that funding available. I want to say that was probably close to $1 billion statewide, that was used to create housing. I think the idea was you had to, like, the jurisdictions had to like have housing ready for occupancy within like 5 or maybe it was 8 months, but it was a very short period of time in order to do it. And so the strategy was all these jurisdictions were like buying motels or hotels and converting it into interim housing or converting them into permanent housing. So I think there have been some complications with it, and each iteration of the program, there have been 2 subsequent rounds since the first one in 2020. It's gotten a little more, it's become a more user friendly. But the first round, I think LA received something like $150 million. That's the city of LA. And I think it was able to produce, capture something like 1,600 units or motel rooms that have now turned into, that are turning into permanent supportive housing. They were interim housing for a short period of time, now turning into permanent. And without that money, we wouldn't have those 1,600 units. So I think that worked pretty well, all things considered.
Well, I want to ask you all, I want to give everybody who's here a chance to ask questions if they have them, but I'm curious, that was hopeful. What about, you other guys, like, do you, anything now what solutions are in front of us? What things are, anything making you hopeful about this crisis?
I always give the realistic side of issues, and by nature, I'm an engineer and I don't make commentaries. I talk only about the facts, ma'am. Today, the new report from federal governmental agency came that the United States of America is in need of 7.3 million affordable housings. And we have only 1 million affordable housings. And in 2030, 50% of 1 million, their affordability affidavit will expire, meaning that those 500,000 could easily be converted to market rate. So if we just put things in perspective, $7.3 million. Oh, by the way, the construction this year compared to last year, 21% low. If we put things in perspective, 7.3 million affordable housing needed in the United States of America. By 2030, 500 gonna go to market rate if we don't do anything about it. I think beside the good work that people like Yasmin do, and I honestly, my hat goes off to you because I would never have the patience to do an affordable housing. But there are some good examples in this country that we should follow, and I think Michael should really. I was just in ULI conference on Monday. There was this young, bright lady in charge of $2 billion affordable housing by Amazon. Unbelievable. I mean, she looked like 20 years old to me, but she was a wealth of knowledge and expertise. And she was talking about the affordable housing effort that Amazon has started primarily in 3 geographic locations where their headquarters is: Puget Sound, Seattle, Nashville, Tennessee, and Virginia. And by $2 billion, they're creating 20,000 units of affordable housing. That means $100,000 per unit. That is admirable. Maybe we should knock at Elon Musk's door to do something similar.
Well,
Or so.
I do have a comment about
But
that.
that is, that to me, it could be a solution to 7.3 million affordable housing that we need. Otherwise, the 1.2 billion here, 1.2 billion dollar there, that is not gonna really solve all the problems. That's just a bunch of facts that
Yeah.
has come out recently.
But we can't produce any housing in California for $100,000 per unit. So that's another issue. So, okay.
Solutions. Just solve it, and then we'll be out of here.
Yeah, I think, when I hear about Amazon, with $2 billion, but okay. The two facts there are really interesting to me. It's, as Yasmin just said, $100,000 a unit just is not what's happening in California. And, everybody wants to know why. And there's, a list of very valid reasons, and there's a list of reasons that we would love to change and we haven't done yet. So the thing that I'm really like upholding Amazon, as a wonderful example there is like the $100,000 a unit. Like, let's try to get closer to that point where we're actually able to produce for people somewhere near that price. But then the $2 billion would be, a drop in the bucket in California, really. It's $2 billion that we would love to have. And, we do need something like $2 billion, but we need much, much more. And I think one of the things that people might be frustrated about when it comes to things like Proposition HHH, everything that Yasmin said, I agree with completely. I've been watching that production process and the financing process of that, happening since, 2017 when we really started doing stuff, is like, one of the reasons why I think we're all disappointed is that $1.2 billion isn't nearly enough to house all of the unhoused people that we have in this in the city and county. And, some might say that we undershot what the people of Los Angeles might have actually been willing to pay for. That's hindsight. We have no idea. And we can't really do anything about it now, particularly because I think a lot of people are frustrated that after spending $1.2 billion, we still have a major, major, major problem. And then the other thing is that people, often don't consider with what we have accomplished through HHH and other means, is that the flow of people into homelessness is so consistent and fast. And much of the reason why it goes back to where we started this conversation, which is that it's very, very expensive to live here because we don't have enough housing for enough people of many means, and that ends up squeezing the most precariously housed people and the poorest people in our midst.
Well, if people here have questions, I think there is an usher who will come around. And so I know it's sort of awkward that I'm not like calling on you, but I think the person with the mic will control it. I just would ask that we try to keep it to questions. I know sometimes people have statements and things to say, but just in the interest of time, questions.
Hello. Okay. So obviously a lot of the focus on money, funds, resources has been to affordable housing and increasingly deeper levels of affordable housing like Triple H. I wonder if, is market rate housing, general housing production, and affordable housing, are they in contradiction to each other? So would that $1.2 billion, and I'm just asking, would it have better spent maybe incentivizing more market rate housing across a larger board, so maybe hiring more city staff, getting the process for market rate housing further expedited, drawing more capital to the region, further incentivizing on a larger scale than these kind of jewel box structurings for a small number of Triple H developments?
I can address that if you want me. Market rate housing has no contradiction with affordable housing. In fact, recently, many of the projects of market rate are mixed income housing, which in my opinion is the best type of housing, low income and market rate in the same building. But we have to remember that we talk about policies and land use and all that, but there's again reality check. The most recent project that I have done construction is a 450 unit condominium. We bought the entitled land, ready to go, shovel ready, for $30 million. We built the project for $355 million. Okay? So a land policy, entitlement, all of the above is only 10%. What bothers us, the market rate people, is the 7% interest rate, is the inflation. I have 450 units of housing. After 3 years, I have sold only 181 units. Not that housing is not available. Housing is not affordable. People cannot, they come, see, they fall in love with the unit, but then they crunch the number 7% interest rate. Thank you very much. It's just a vicious cycle. And then what happens? An investor who pays $1 million negative cash every month, if you give him land for free, he will not invest, which we don't. In fact, if you all know in downtown LA, all the Chinese investors pulled out. One is in bankruptcy, one sold it for almost fire sale, we are the third one. So there are much bigger problems that we see in our line of work, not affordable housing, that is above and beyond policy, land, this is basically free economy. Supply and demand, in this case, with this kind of interest rate, and also to add to it the social issues that we have in certain places like San Francisco, LA, doesn't help. We have foreign investors and buyers. They come and look at homeless sitting in our Broadway sidewalk. Adios. These are cash buyers. And quite honestly, in the last 3-4 units that I've sold, they all have been to cash buyers because nobody can finance 7% interest rate plus your property tax plus your homeowner association. Forget it. And you know, when we talk about dense, high-density housing, we're talking about high-rise. Single-family dwelling does not solve the housing shortage. In fact, it is very, in my opinion, destructive to environment. You live in Palm de Lancaster, you drive 2 hours, you pollute the environment, a husband and wife living there. But when I have 450 units on top of each other, that's not bad. But who can afford to buy it? That's the problem.
How often does the city review the code to determine redundancy, efficacy, and utility? And would that help expedite processes if there's redundancy, and whether they actually work or serve its original intent?
Every 43 years, because that's when they started when I came to America. And city of LA, unfortunately, again, I get in trouble by saying this, is on that department is dysfunctional. Not to mention that it's not just zoning. We have to remember, city of LA has 41 or 43 departments. When you do market rate housing, and even affordable to a certain extent, you don't deal with all 43, but you deal with probably 28. No, it's fact. I mean, transportation, public sewer, building safety planning, on and on and on and on and on. That's how we make a living, consultants. So it's like when you say how often they review as totality, never. They add layers to it. It's like a lasagna. It's constantly adding layers to it. And when they add layers, they don't realize that this layer is good for San Pedro, but doesn't apply to Chatsworth. And that's one of our major problems, that this place is too big. If I close your eyes, blindfold you, drop you in San Pedro, and I drop you the day after in Chatsworth, do you know you're in the same country even? So what's good for the goose is good for gander doesn't apply here. Doesn't apply. Downtown LA has nothing to do with San Pedro. But we have been saying this for 3 administrations that let's simplify this. But so far in the last 43 years, the zoning code has not changed.
But we revisit, we do a general plan and like the housing element.
They are updated.
Those are updated.
That's right.
Like every
That's right.
8 years or something.
That's right.
But
No.
but you're saying that's more
It's more lasagna.
Bandage.
more bechamel and pasta and red sauce.
Can I ask a follow-up question? Hamid, what would you do to simplify the building code?
I put it in the shredder and rewrite it from scratch. No, it's the fact. Because this zoning code was written for a type of suburban development. 5 feet side yard, 5 feet side yard, 15 feet rear yard, and prevailing setback in front. That doesn't apply. We have made a lot of changes. A lot of it has been corrected. But the problem is that when you don't do it fundamentally right, you cannot catch up. And especially now that we have 106 assembly bills and Senate bills, the state and local should come together, say, let's combine all of these together and make something quick and comprehensive and beneficial. But unfortunately, it doesn't work. The first day that we started reforming zoning code, they went to Colorado and hired a consultant. I was in the mayor's office. I said, come on, why do we need somebody from Colorado to change zoning code in LA? Your first step, your foundation is wrong. You should get somebody who knows the neighborhood. Guess what? 43 years hasn't changed yet.
But are you saying that San Pedro should have a different code from downtown LA, should have a different code from Chatsworth?
No,
Or
ma'am,
how
no.
would you solve that issue when they're all so different?
No, ma'am. San Pedro is a different neighborhood, different character. Downtown LA is different. Sylmar is different. All of these, but we are trying to do one size fits all. And that's why it's so dysfunctional. And then what do? We add community plan, which is fine. Then we do a specific plan here, a specific plan here, a specific plan here. I mean, these are layers of layers of layers of layers of lasagna. Some of them taste good, some of them don't. And that's real the problem. But again, let's not exaggerate on the effect and impact of entitlement and land in the overall development. Remember always that example, $30 million, $355 million. Even if you solve and we become perfectly fine on zoning code and land use issues, what am I gonna get another $325 million to build this monster? That is with interest rate of 7.5%. I build it with 5.5%. If I build it with 7.5%, the same condominium that I have 1.6, you gotta pay 1.9. As I said, it's a vicious cycle, and I don't wanna make everybody depressed, I apologize. But it's just the facts, ma'am.
We have more questions.
So I'm curious if any of you have perhaps a wish list with regards to Prop 13, and if that would in any way change the situation with regards to affordable housing.
I'm not gonna make comment on Prop 13.
Wow, you've been so bold. Prop 13 is the third rail, isn't it? You know, I mean, I think that Prop 13 is a pretty damaging policy in its current form, in the way that it disincentivizes housing production at the local level, and really sends localities chasing different forms of tax dollars, which is usually sales tax. You know, but I don't think it makes a lot of sense in the short run to just throw it out because there's a lot of losers from that policy, from an action like that would really harm people. So, there's ways to, I think, there's ways to grandfather people, there's ways to stagger the kind of, to get to a point where we don't have Prop 13 looming over us in such a, in such a influential way. So really, I'm for kind of phasing Prop 13 out over time, because I just think you have to protect people who banked on not having like swift increases in their property taxes. The people in my neighborhood who have their homes valued at $200,000 or less, like you can't put them at 1.5 right tomorrow. You have to, if you're going to really get rid of it eventually, like you have to protect those people, and there's certainly ways to do it. It's just politically, it just doesn't seem like the state has the appetite for it.
Thank you very much. I'm sure that our panelists may have heard the term before that a house is not a home. Not asking you, in addition to being developers, to become social scientists, but is there anything in addition to your overall planning that goes into the structure of the types of buildings that you're building, the affordable housing, the market rate housing? Specifically, from my perspective, there is very, actually, I wouldn't want to castigate that. There's green space in many of these, because the discussions that I'm listening and hearing right now, there's primarily building lots of stuff for people to have a roof over their head. But these structures that you're building do not sound like family structures, to be quite honest with you, when I look at what's been done downtown. And the second part of that question, and specifically speaking about downtown, about 20 years ago, I'm sure you're aware that Ted Hayes had the environment of Justiceville. Tiny homes have been around since the cave Stone Age. And it worked well with Justiceville. As a matter of fact, I happened to help out at the end and purchase some of the domes myself. We're actually having that discussion now. There are homes that are affordable. They're under $10,000 a pop. As you just pointed out, Hamid, that the land is now becoming more and more bountiful. And back then, the Japanese had overextended themselves in real estate in downtown LA. And we got Justiceville partly because of that, because of the I guess you call it the decrease in land value. Is that something that we should be looking at again? Because tiny homes, as you know, are the rage. They don't necessarily seem to be the rage for low income. They seem to be sort of a nuanced Art Deco thing. So
I can address the open space and green space. In fact, with all the criticism that I have from LA City zoning code, in one aspect they're not too bad, and that's green space. And I'll tell you why. We have open space ordinance in the city of LA that is enforced very, very vigorously. I give you an example. Where our building is 35-story building, 450 units, we were mandated to put 118 trees in the middle of basically 450 feet on the rooftop, as well as 136 feet on the podium. We put more than 118. In this building, we created 49,000 square feet of amenities and green space, which is one of the reasons our building is so expensive. But that requirement applies to any market rate building in downtown LA or anywhere that you build, such as Koreatown, such as West Side. So in urban environment, to have a 49,000 square feet of amenities and green space and 120 so many trees, that's not bad. In fact, what we call our building, we call it a vertical community because, again, it's not marketing on my project. I want to explain the open space. We have 2 dog parks. We have swimming pool, jacuzzi, we have beauty salon for dogs, we have theater, we have gymnasium, we have yoga studio, all of the above. 49,000 square feet. I think that's excessive in some reason. That's why our building is so expensive. But they ask you to do all of these in market rate. I don't know about affordable as much. So I don't see any shortage on that. And yes, we don't have a side yard and front yard like suburban single-family homes, but green space and amenities is not just the side yard and barbecue, although we have about 24 barbecues in the building. So it's basically more amenity because today we have a beautiful, beautiful swimming pool and jacuzzi. Nobody uses it. But our yoga room, our beauty salon for dogs, our dog parks are used all the time. So the urbanized people have different demand. They don't want grass anymore, although we have a meadow grass as big as this room. Nobody goes there, but everybody goes to yoga. Everybody goes to theater. Our lounge is constantly reserved. People have wedding in there. So let's talk about amenities rather than open space. Open space is great, but amenity is wonderful. And younger people like gymnasium, like lounge place, like whatever that we have created for them. That's my response to the open space, and I don't remember the second part of the question.
The tiny homes, and I'll just say quickly, I think sometimes there's the sort of architectural like tiny home trend that you see on social media or Instagram of these little cute like tree houses and things people have created. There's sort of that version of the tiny home movement, and then I think sometimes that gets conflated with what we call these tiny home villages in Los Angeles, which are essentially pallet shelters that are temporary shelters that are, used for unhoused people to stay in temporarily, but they're not designed for long-term use. They're definitely not permanent homes. They don't have their own restrooms, things like that. And I think from the reporting I've done, I think they're a good shelter option to have for many people who don't like congregate shelters for a lot of different reasons. Are good to have in the mix, but I don't think they're part of the conversation, or at least they're not permanent structures, not permanent homes.
Yeah, I would agree with that. There's a spectrum of tiny homes, and I think they can serve different needs, market or subsidized or what have you. But I don't know that it's like I don't know that it's like a solution. I think it's one of many strategies that I think we need to be using. I think we need to be doing everything to address the affordability crisis and the homelessness issue.
Should we do one more question and then we'll be outside if people have other burning questions? But
just quickly on how you get to the estimate for the 1.2 million over 5 years of new units, I think was the number that you talked about. Is that for population growth, or is it to build enough units that would drive down the cost of apartments and single-family homes or whatever?
Yeah, that's more based on the latter of what you said. So it's more about getting our cost of housing more aligned with what people can afford. And I'm drawing. First of all, I'm drawing from the back of my head. I don't have this written down in front of me, so I will double check that.
I do have it written down. I think it's 1.3 million units by 2029 for Southern California. I think, right, this is the state.
Yes.
These are goals set by the state that are based
That was
on
close enough. I'll
projected
take it.
population growth. Yeah.
existing residents?
Yeah. So the question was, does that, how much does that involve, new people moving to Los Angeles when we're making those projections? Is that, basically right? So, first we assume that we are going to have people migrating to Los Angeles from other locations. The cost of housing does affect the extent to which people are going to move in. It's going to affect the speed at which people exit Los Angeles, right? And different people can totally differ in terms of whether they want more people living in Los Angeles or not, right? But like, there's probably not a point at which you could build so much housing that it's going to be too much given the cost of living here as it currently stands. And, also kind of taking into account the fact that we build quite slowly here. And then, last thing I'll say there is like, it's not usually the case. Well, like I said, at the margin, the cost of housing is going to impact how fast people leave the city and whether or not somebody decides to take a job here. But that's not going to drive huge numbers. Like, people are going to decide to move here based on the cost of housing and a bunch of other things. People are going to decide to leave here based on the cost of housing and a bunch of other things. So it's not the only thing that's going to drive migration in and out of Los Angeles, not even close.
Well, thank you guys. I think we'll wrap it up there, just given the time. But we'll be outside in the lobby. So, like I said, if there's burning questions, I'm sure we'll be able to get to them. But thank you all so much for coming out. Thank you guys for coming out on a Thursday night. Really appreciate it. Okay. All right, drop the mic.